Good evening, everyone. I thought we'd get started, and I'll run through my talk, and then at the end, I want to be able to open this up for questions that you guys might have. As a lot of you already know, my name is Kelly Barth, Adoption-Related Services as their Latvia Program Director. I'll be your moderator this evening for our webinar, and we're also being joined here by our Agency Director, Barbara Lorenzo. If after our talk you'd like to ask any additional questions or get any additional information or documents from us, just let me know and I'd be happy to send that along. Just a reminder that during our call it would be wonderful if you could please mute your phones so that there's no background noise and so that everyone can hear us clearly. Thank you so much. Again, thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope that you've all had a wonderful Christmas, and we can see by your attendance on this call that you may be interested in making an adoption plan from Latvia. We thought that we would offer this conference call to give potential adoptive families an opportunity to learn a little bit more about us here at Adoption-Related Services and what we do, as well as to learn a little bit more about the adoption process from Latvia. This is just a brief introduction. Any additional questions? If we cannot answer all of your questions this evening, we do invite you to call us directly anytime, and we can walk you through this process in detail. Topics I'd like to cover this evening are information about our agency and about our director and myself, and we'd like you to meet the rest of our team. We'd also like to talk a little bit about the country. We'll also spend quite a process of adopting a child from Latvia and all the steps that are involved with that. We're going to talk a little bit about the process once your adoption is completed and the paperwork that's needed after that point. We'll discuss the fees. We'll help you with some information on financing your adoption expenses. Then we'll talk a little bit about some current trends and hot button issues that are going on in Latvia right now. We also have a screen that gives you some facts about adoption from Latvia. And then finally, we do have our contact information at the end and several of photos of some of our families with their children from Latvia. As I mentioned before, my name is Kelly Barth, and I thought I would start off by telling you a little bit about our agency, about our director, and about myself. Adoption-Related Services is a licensed nonprofit, well-established adoption agency in good standing that has been in operation since 2006. We have been continuously Hague accredited since 2008 and have been accredited to work within the country of Latvia since 2009. As mentioned earlier, Adoption-Related Services is Hague accredited as well as accredited by Latvia to facilitate adoptions in that country. We are also a 501c3 organization, so know that any donations made to us on behalf of your adoption would be tax deductible to your benefactor. Based in Pennsylvania, we are able to work with clients located in all 50 states. We are also able to complete home study reports for families residing in the states of Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Barbara Lorenzo, our agency director, is a licensed clinical social worker, and she and her husband are the proud parents to wonderful teenage boys who came to them through an adoption.
Shut up!
When the boys were just 4 years old.
Naomi, don't be a little brat.
She has worked with children and families for over 20 years in business for 14 years. Throughout her career as a clinical social worker, she has worked with families and children in a variety of settings, including protective service and foster care, special needs adoption, psychiatric rehabilitation, and since 2006 as the executive director of ARS. Barbara became aware of the plight of orphan children through her own adoption experience, and this is when she decided that it was her calling to help other families with their adoptions.
Hi, everybody, and welcome.
A little bit about myself. My husband and I are the proud parents of 2 children through adoption. Our son was adopted domestically as an infant from New York, and our daughter was adopted as an infant from Russia. They are now 18 and 20 years old. I have worked in international adoptions for over 16 years now and have a vast background working in several different countries in Eastern Europe, as well as in Guatemala as an adoption facilitator. Additionally, I also own and operate a licensed home study agency, which is based in Georgia, where I live. My work with Latvia and my work with my home study agency are completely separate from each other unless you reside in Georgia or Tennessee, and I'm lucky enough to be able to complete your home study report. I tell you all of this because both Barbara and I have unique backgrounds in that we have been involved in all facets of the adoption process for a long time now, and have a lot of experience and knowledge that will be helpful to you during your own adoption process. Let me tell you a little bit about how I became involved with adoptions from Latvia so that you can all learn a little bit more about the person who would be guiding you through all of your adoption paperwork should you decide to work with us. Almost 9 years ago, the former director of one of the larger orphan hosting programs, based here in Georgia, had approached me and asked if I could assist their host families who were adopting from Latvia with their dossier paperwork. I had already been working in international adoptions for about 8 years at the time and had the experience needed to assist their host families. At that time, you could adopt from Latvia independently, meaning that you could adopt without needing to work with an adoption agency. I happily accepted this offer and began assisting host families with their adoptions from Latvia. Then, about 8 years ago, the United States ratified the Hague Treaty with regard to international adoptions, meaning that families could no longer adopt from Latvia unless they worked with a Hague-accredited adoption agency. I truly wanted to continue with this line of work as I have always found it to be so rewarding to help these older children to find their forever families. So I connected with Barbara Lorenzo at ARS so that we could work together to help bring children home from Latvia for adoption. Barbara had already been completing safety visits and home study reports for many of the Latvia host families in Pennsylvania for several years, so she knew Latvia very well. Because we are both also adoptive parents ourselves, I think our perspective is extremely helpful in that we have been in your shoes before and understand how important it is to you that your adoptions be completed as quickly and efficiently as possible. Having worked in Latvia for almost 9 years now, I think I can safely say that I have become quite knowledgeable about the adoption process there, although there are certainly new things that I continue to learn each and every day. Barbara and I have a fantastic working relationship with our attorney in Latvia, as well as with the Ministry of Children's Welfare, who oversees adoptions in Latvia. As a matter of fact, in the summer of 2012, we were honored to have a representative from the Ministry of Children's Welfare, as well as our Latvian attorney, visit us here in the United States for 2 weeks. It was really wonderful to get to know them better. Here at ARS, we all work together as an amazing team and do all that we can to complete this process for you as quickly as possible. As well, Dinah, who is our attorney in Latvia for our agency, regularly sends families our way when she is approached by someone outside of the hosting programs who may be interested in adopting. This shows that she is very confident in our abilities as well. Should you decide to work with adoption-related services and myself, I would be your dossier and paperwork person and liaison throughout your entire adoption process. I will assist you with every aspect of your adoption and will hold your hand as much or as little as you need. I can assure you that we will correspond a lot and get to know each other very well. And again, if you reside in either Georgia or Tennessee, I would also be happy to assist you with the completion of your home study report through my home study agency, and Barbara can assist you with a home study if you reside in the states of Pennsylvania or North Carolina. Now, most of you have probably heard of Dinah Rose, who is an incredible woman and attorney. She is a dedicated advocate for our families as well as for the children of Latvia. Dinah works tirelessly well into the night when most people should be sleeping. Dinah has also had the experience of being an orphanage director herself many years ago. She is extremely well connected and well respected within Latvia. Dinah has another attorney, legal assistant, and drivers available to assist you with your adoptions in Latvia. Besides having several social workers on staff to assist families with home study reports, we also have a very dedicated office staff as well. Sherry Perky has been with us since 2007, and many of you will get to know Sherry very well, as she will be the one sending and collecting required documents from you, typing up grant letters, invoicing you for services, and about a million other things. Sherry always has a smile on and is more than willing to help you with anything that you may need. Gail has been with us since 2014 and is our behind-the-scenes lady who helps keep our vast amount of adoption paperwork in order. I wanted to now share just a little information about the country of Latvia. Latvia is officially known as the Republic of Latvia. Latvia is a country of over 2 million people, located in the Baltic region of Northern Europe, and is one of the 3 Baltic states. It is bordered by Estonia, Lithuania, Russia, and Belarus. Its capital city is Riga, and its currency is the euro. Latvia is a stable democracy experiencing rapid economic growth. Latvia is a very adoption-friendly country and has always supported international adoptions. Of the countries I have worked with personally, Latvia is the only one who would genuinely like to find forever families for their orphan children. In Latvia, you will find that about half of their orphan children reside in orphanages and half reside in foster families. Although the official language is Latvian, you will find that about half of the population also speaks Russian. Russia occupied Latvia for much of its history, and the Russian culture can still be felt there today. Next, I would like to talk a bit about the process of adopting from Latvia. First, please know that Barbara and I are available to you at any time throughout your adoption process. Again, we are unique in that we are also adoptive parents ourselves. We have been in your shoes before and understand the excitement and the fears that you have about adoption. We understand the financial concerns you all have, as well as your sense of urgency in getting your adoption completed as quickly as possible. I think that this is a perspective that not many adoption agencies can offer. Also, we often work very long hours and can usually respond to your emails as early as 6:30 in the morning, and if there's an emergency or an urgent matter to attend to, we will be here for you after hours as well if you need us. Many folks often find me catching up on emails over the weekend too. I also want to mention that Latvia itself is unique in that they are a very adoption-friendly country. In fact, they regularly send out a list of children who become available for adoption in Latvia and ask if the accredited agencies working in Latvia can help to find families for these children. We are not aware of any other country that does this. They truly try to do the best that they can in taking care of their children with their limited resources, and they are very supportive of adoptive families. So Latvia has a relatively predictable adoption process, although you do always have to be prepared for the possibility of the unexpected with any international adoption. Before you begin the paperwork process to adopt a noble child from Latvia, please consider very carefully the plan that you have to incorporate this new child into your home and family. Remember that many of the children in Latvia who've been in state care come with a history of trauma, abuse, and neglect, and as such will often require additional help and resources in order to assimilate them into your family and to help guide them to a brighter future. Adopting an older child is not easy and should not be taken. Please be sure that you have the resources and the emotional ability to help your child to overcome some of the negative aspects of their background. Therapy is often needed and recommended when adopting an older child, so please be open to that if necessary. We have a lot of resources available to help you in this regard, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you feel that you need additional help for your family or your child. As well, many of you know that part of your home study process will require 10 hours of adoption training. Some states require even more than that. When you apply to us, we will also send you numerous resources and training articles that we ask you to please read Usually, your hosting program would have this information in their interview notes, and they would be happy to answer this for you. But if they are unsure, we can check on this by contacting our attorney in Latvia to see if she can get this information for you. But before we do so, please understand that you should be sure that adoption is definitely something you wish to pursue. The reason for this is that when our attorney calls a child's orphan court and asks about their legal status for adoption, this is a child's private information, and the courts can sometimes get upset with her if they feel that an inquiry about a child was not a serious one. Both we and the courts want to spare the child any disappointment they may feel if you should decide that making an adoption plan is not right for your family. Please also know that it can sometimes take several weeks for our attorney to obtain this information from the court, as some courts are simply more responsive than others. We know it is really hard to have to wait to learn this information, but do know that we are doing all that we can to get this information for you as quickly as possible. In order for our attorney to inquire about a child's legal status for adoption, we would need their full name, date of birth, region they reside in, orphan court they are assigned to, and the name of their orphanage or foster family. We provide an updated list of children to inquire about to our attorney daily once the host children have returned to Latvia. As well, we know that many of you would like to know if your host child wants to be adopted before starting the adoption process, as this only makes sense. In order to make this request, Latvia wants to see that the family has already hosted their child and has made a commitment to adopting this child by either starting a home study report or sending in an application to work with their adoption placing agency. If you should decide to work with ARS for your adoption, then we would be considered to be your placing agency. This way, the court knows that the inquiry about one of their children is a serious one. Again, the court wants to be sure you understand that if one of their children is asked if they would like to be adopted into your family, and the child says yes to that, the child would be devastated if they were unable to then be adopted. Our attorney does the best that she can in trying to get these questions answered for you, but we are finding now that many of the orphan courts will not allow their children to be asked about adoption until the family has an approved dossier in Latvia. The reason for this is because there have been several families over the years who have made a verbal commitment to their host child about adoption and then have not followed through with an adoption plan. This devastates the child and it angers the courts, as you might imagine. So again, we will try to get this question answered for you as well, but we cannot promise that the court will comply with this request and allow the child to be spoken to about adoption. We realize that this puts you in a very difficult position, one that we will do all that we can to help you through. Once you make the decision to formally move forward with an adoption plan, you will want to send an application into the adoption agency with whom you would like to work for your adoption from Latvia. Each agency needs to have an application on file for any clients they are working with, as the application gives us consent to work with your home study agency, with immigration, etc. To work with our agency for your adoption. The next thing to do would be to engage the services of a Hague-accredited home study agency in your state to begin your home study report. I will also assist you with locating an agency in your state and will work closely with them during the completion of your report to make sure that it meets both immigration and Latvia's guidelines. Study agency, as you call them, as this will help with making a decision with whom to work for your report. Your home study process will typically take approximately 6 to 12 weeks with most agencies. Barbara and I can complete these reports more quickly if you are able to work with us for the home study. The home study process will entail meetings with your home study agency social worker, collecting numerous documents, completing criminal background checks, a medical exam, and the completion of a minimum of 10 hours of Hague-approved adoption training. The home study report is also an opportunity for one-on-one time with your social worker, who will begin to train you on the challenges of adopting an older child into your home, and how to help your new child work through some of the early childhood trauma and neglect that they may have suffered. Once your home study report is completed, you will file your paperwork with Citizen and Immigration Services, otherwise known as CIS. At this point, you will be seeking immigration approval to bring an orphan child into the U.S. to reside here with you permanently. The form you will file for this is called the I-800A form. The main component of the I-800A form is your home study report. You will also be fingerprinted again by CIS. Your immigration approval typically arrives about 6 to 8 weeks after filing the I-800A form. As a side note, anyone who may be interested in adopting a child who will be turning 16 soon must file this form before the child's 16th birthday, or they will age out and no longer be eligible for an international adoption. After the I-800A form is filed, we will begin the process of preparing your dossier for Latvia. A dossier is a legalized set of documents required by the Ministry of Children's Welfare and the courts in Latvia describing and approving you as an adoptive family. Once your dossier has been sent to Latvia, it is submitted for translation, which can take about 2 to 4 weeks. Once the Ministry of Children's Welfare in Latvia reviews your dossier and approves you as an adoptive family, you will first receive an official referral from the ministry with additional health and social background information on your prospective adoptive child. The referral will also likely include some information as to why the child is in state care and whether or not they have any immediate biological family. Barbara then does a fantastic job at explaining to you the information contained within your child's referral, as well as pointing out any areas of concern. If you have questions that are critical to your decision to move forward with the adoption of the child you are referred, this would be the time to ask those questions of the ministry, and they will investigate and formally provide you with answers. Once you decide to accept the referral of your child, then you will be formally invited by Latvia to begin the adoption process with them. The letter of invitation will be sent to ARS via email from the ministry, and we will forward this on to you. You are usually invited to come to Latvia about 3 to 4 weeks after accepting your referral. From the time you submit an approved dossier to the Ministry of Children's Welfare until the time you travel on your first trip is typically about 2 to 4 months, provided your child's paperwork is all in order in Latvia. Sometimes there can be a holdup with the Latvian side if your child has not been completely cleared for both domestic and international adoption. Adoption is a two-part process in Latvia, and the child has to be cleared for domestic adoption first, and then they have to be cleared by the court to be adopted internationally. This second court hearing is merely a formality and nothing to worry about, but it is often not initiated until there is a dossier in Latvia to adopt the child. If you have not hosted a child and are considering going straight to an adoption plan from Latvia, then once your dossier arrives in Latvia, it is approved by the Ministry of Children's Welfare, and as soon as a child becomes available for adoption who meets the age and gender parameters of the child you wish to adopt, we are sent the child's referral forward onto you. Your referral information will also include a picture of the child. In this case, the referral may take a little longer depending upon the parameters of the child you hope to adopt. You will be making 3 trips to Latvia to complete the adoption process. The first trip is your first court hearing and the completion of the required bonding period under Latvian adoption law. This bonding period is necessary before the court will allow your child to leave Latvia with you. The first trip typically lasts on average about 14 days if you have hosted your child, as with hosting, you are already considered to having started the bonding period. The only exception to this is the region of Riga, where the first trip is a minimum of 3 weeks long, even if you have hosted your child. If you have not hosted the child you plan to adopt, you will be required to stay longer to get to know your child under the guidance of the court. This can potentially add up to 1 week onto your first trip. In both cases, please add on 2 additional days to your trip if you plan to bring your child home with you after the first trip, as you will need this time in order to obtain your child's visitor's visa. The visitor's visa allows the child to return to the U.S. and stay with you for the remainder of the adoption process. As just mentioned, the length of your first trip is Latvia's bonding period, which is required under their adoption law and is entirely up to your judge in Latvia to determine. So, unfortunately, we do not have any control over the exact amount of time that you will be away on the first trip. Both adoptive parents, if applicable, must be present for this first trip, and your adopted child will stay with you while you are in Latvia. You will go before the judge at the beginning and then again at the end of this trip, and you will be visited by a court-appointed social worker 1 to 3 times in between. The social worker will give a written report back to the judge as to how you and your child are bonding with each other, and at the end of your trip, when you go before the judge a second time, you may request that the judge permit you to bring your child back to the U.S. with you while you complete the remainder of the adoption process. It is not a requirement to bring your child home after the first trip, but it is an option available to you, and one that we strongly recommend if possible, as it allows for a longer bonding period and also allows your child to get better acquainted with the English language. After this first trip, you will go home and file additional immigration paperwork called the I-800 form. The I-800 form actually identifies the child you are adopting to immigration, and you will wait for a second approval from them to move forward with the remainder of the adoption process. After the I-800 approval is received, there is one more form to file with the U.S. Embassy called the DS-260 form, which will automatically initiate your child's Social Security number once your adoption has been completed. A few weeks after you arrive home from your first trip, you will ask your home study agency social worker to visit your home and produce what we call a hosting report that you will bring with you back to Latvia, detailing for the judge how your child is doing in your home during the adoption process or the bonding period. Of course, I will prompt you for all of these things at the appropriate time. Your second trip to Latvia occurs approximately 2.5 to 3 months after the first. The appearance at your second court hearing is when your adoption will be considered finalized in Latvia. Once your adoption is finalized in Latvia, it cannot be reversed. Only one adoptive parent and any child aged 12 years and older must travel back to Latvia on this second trip. Any child under the age of 12 can remain home. You will typically spend 3 days in Latvia as you leave to come back home the day after you appear in court. After the second court hearing, there is a mandatory 20-day waiting period, and then an adoption decree and a new birth certificate will be produced by the court for your child. And then these documents will be translated and given to you on your third trip. Your third and final trip to Latvia will occur approximately 6 to 8 weeks after the second trip and is your required embassy appointment where you will obtain an immigrant visa for your child. Only one adoptive parent and all adopted children, regardless of age, must travel back to Latvia on this third trip. This trip typically lasts 5 days in Latvia, as there is a required embassy interview, medical exam, and additional documentation that must be completed. The reason that this trip occurs so much later after trip 2 is because, as mentioned earlier, Latvia requires a mandatory 20-day waiting period before your child's new birth certificate and adoption decree can be issued. Both of these items are needed for your embassy appointment on trip 3. When you arrive back to the U.S. after this trip, your child will now be considered to be a U.S. citizen. A Social Security number will automatically be generated for your child as well. All children over the age of 14 will have the additional task of appearing at a swearing-in ceremony with immigration a couple of months after they come home. One of the most common questions we get all the time is, how long will it take to complete my adoption? That is a hard question to answer because each and every adoption experience is completely different from the next. There are so many variables to consider that it is truly hard to predict. Our best guesstimate on the time to complete an adoption right now would be approximately 10 to 12 months from the very start of your home study report process to arriving home after your third trip, if there are no unforeseen glitches and if you can complete your paperwork quickly. Also, do keep in mind that some regions within Latvia simply work more quickly than others, and this can also affect your timeline as well. Our attorney will do all that she can on her end to assist you with a speedy adoption, but do keep in mind that as an attorney, she can only legally represent you in court for your adoption. She cannot make a court move more quickly than the court wants to move, and this can sometimes feel a little frustrating to adoptive parents. Just think about how the court systems work here in the United States. Attorneys do not have the authority to set court hearings, and it is no different in Latvia. But truly, there is no better attorney or who's more respected or more connected than Dinah Rose. So know that your case is being handled by the very best that there is in Latvia. Once your adoption has been completed, we would ask that you please make copies of all of your final documents that you brought home from Latvia and send them to us for your file. Also, if you have not already done so, you will want to schedule a full medical and dental examination of your child to get a baseline reading of any issues that may need to be taken care of now that your child is covered under your medical insurance plan. We would recommend that your child initially be seen by an international adoption specialist who is experienced with seeing children adopted from other countries who may have been residing in an institution. We will provide you with a list of these specialists at the time of your official referral. A Social Security number will automatically be generated for your child, as you will have been instructed to complete this process during your adoption. Once the Security number is received, you will then want to apply for your child's U.S. passport. Not all states require that you readopt your child within your state. However, we will strongly urge you to get this done. Readopting your child is also called the domestication of a foreign adoption, and will grant your child a U.S.-issued birth certificate. Most states will allow you to initiate the readoption on your own without the assistance of an adoption attorney. You will also be completing a 1- and a 2-year post-adoption report that will be due in Latvia on the anniversary of your second trip. These reports allow Latvia to see how your child is doing in your home. This report is completed exactly the same way as the hosting report was completed between your first and second trip by the Home Study Agency. Because we know this is a critical component in making a decision to adopt from Latvia, we would also like to talk about the cost of an adoption from Latvia. We believe in preparing you completely for this process, and that contrary to what you may learn through other adoption sources, it is highly improbable that you would be able to complete the entire adoption process for less than $35,000 total for the adoption of one child. The majority of your costs are for the airfare required to complete your 3 trips. The fee schedule that we have already sent to some of you lists all of the fees for your adoption from soup to nuts, and we have listed most of them here on your screen as well. When we state that total costs for the adoption of one child are approximately $35,000 to $37,000, we are including everything down to the last postage stamp and long-distance phone call that you would make. Just to lighten that heavy blow just a bit, the vast majority of you will qualify to receive the adoption tax credit once your adoption has been finalized. The adoption tax credit means that in the year that you complete your adoption, you will receive $13,460 per child back from the federal government when you file your federal income taxes. We will discuss this a little more in just a few minutes. There are also numerous organizations who are offering adoption grants, and we can send you a list of these sources as well. We have had quite a few of our families fundraise their entire adoption costs. We have been told that some adoption agencies are quoting costs as low as $25,000 for your total adoption expenses for the adoption of one child from Latvia. We do not feel that this is an accurate representation, and again, we would much rather you be honestly prepared for this process than to make a promise that we do not feel is accurate just to sway you to work with us. please be aware that the only difference in fees between us and some of the other adoption agencies to you is in regard to the agency fee itself, and this is minimal. We use the same attorney in Latvia as 2 other adoption agencies, so besides the agency fees, every other expense for your adoption would be exactly the same regardless of which agency you choose. Your choice with whom to work will come down to preference, reputation, availability, and efficiency. We would welcome you to please check many, many references and talk to lots of other adoptive families about their experiences and their total adoption fees before making a final decision with whom to work. We would much rather be completely honest with you about the costs and have you prepared for that than try to win you over by quoting lower costs, only for you to find out later on that that wasn't realistic and you are left scrambling trying to find the additional financial resources. As well, please note that any agency offering you a discounted adoption fee because you have hosted your prospective adoptive child is not actually permitted to do so under the rules of the Hague Treaty on International Adoption. Some agencies state that they are offering you a discounted fee, but in actuality it is the same fee as other adoption agencies' regular fees are. Please carefully review any fee schedules that you are given and focus on the total actual agency fees itself, as all other costs associated with your adoption will be the same between the agencies you may have been referred to by your hosting program. We also would like to mention that we have a bank account set up for attorney here in the United States so that you will have limited amounts of cash that you will have to carry with you on your trips to Latvia. We are able to deposit your in-country costs directly into her account for you. Carrying large amounts of cash to Latvia has always been of concern to families, and we just wanted you to know that you will not have to worry about that with our agency. There are many options available to you to assist you with your adoption expenses. Of the most important to point out is the adoption tax credit. The adoption tax credit currently stands at $13,460 in tax credit per child for any adoption completed during the 2016 calendar year. What this means is that when you file your taxes in the year in which your adoption was finalized, you will get back up to $13,460 in federal taxes as a quote-unquote refund. You are not able to get back more money than you have paid in federal taxes, so if you cannot take the full credit the first year, you can roll over any unused credit until you can receive the entire amount. Also note that there are many other resources for obtaining monies towards your adoption expenses, and we have a very comprehensive list of these resources contained in our information packet. We would like to cover a few points of interest now. Please note that the current adoption rules in Latvia state that there must be a minimum of 18 years age difference between the adoptive child and both adoptive parents. Recently enacted adoption legislation has opened this rule up to being challenged if the prospective adoptive parents can show that there is a close familial bond to the child they hope to adopt. To date, we have had several exceptions granted to this age rule for our families. In these cases, the adoptive parents were close to the 18-year age difference and had hosted their child on 2 separate occasions, showing Latvia that there was a clear familial bond between the prospective adoptive parents and the child. Our attorney has advised that some courts in Latvia refuse to make any exceptions to this 18-year age rule, so each challenge to this new law must be considered on a case-by-case basis. Also note that the Ministry of Children's Welfare had initially advised that they will not consider approving any adoption where there is less than 16 years age difference between the prospective adoptive parents and the adoptive child. But even they seem to be a little bit more flexible if there is that close emotional and familial bond to the child that the family hopes to adopt. Also note that after each hosting program, Latvia requests that each adoption agency provide to them a list of children who have been hosted and who will be adopted either by their host family or by a family they met during hosting. This list is called the Ministry List and must be sent to the Ministry of Children's Welfare within 30 days of the end of the hosting program. The Ministry of Children's Welfare is, again, the main government body in Latvia that oversees adoptions. Theoretically, the ministry would then notify our attorney should a family from another country wish to adopt your child, or if another hosting program wishes to include your host child in their hosting program, so that you can be given priority because you have already established an emotional bond with that child. Know that Latvian citizens will always be given priority when it comes to adopting one of their children, regardless of how many times you may have hosted the child. But once your adoption process has formally started within Latvia, they are considered to be your child, and other foreign families may not adopt them. In regard to the ministry list, if you decide that you would like to work with our agency for your adoption, please send me an email as soon as possible expressing your desire to have your host child placed on the ministry list. But please only place your host child on the ministry list if you are 110% committed to completing an adoption plan, because once a child is placed on that list, they lose the opportunity to be adopted by another family or to participate in another hosting program, which would really not be fair to them should you be unable to complete the adoption process. The information that I need from you for the ministry list is your last name, the child's full name, date of birth, region they reside in, orphan court they are assigned to, and the name of their orphanage or foster family. Excuse me. We would also like to take a minute to address the ability to have contact with your prospective adopted child once they return to Latvia after hosting. First, let me explain a bit about the rules of the Hague Treaty, which oversees adoptions from Latvia by U.S. citizens. According to the Hague Treaty, there is not supposed to be any contact between the prospective adoptive parents, the orphanage, the foster family in Latvia, and the child they are adopting during the adoption process unless permission for that contact has been granted by the Ministry of Children's Welfare. However, we do realize that it would be difficult to ask any family to cut off all contact with their prospective adopted child once they return to Latvia after hosting. Because this issue has become so sensitive in Latvia, we would ask that all contact with your host child be kept light in nature until your dossier has been submitted to the ministry for approval. For example, when speaking with your host child, feel free to talk about how their day was, how school was, how they're feeling, and things like that. But please do not discuss adoption in any way, shape, or form, even if your host child brings it up. Once your dossier is actually at the ministry, you can then freely discuss your adoption plans with your host child. Also, please do not discuss fees associated with your adoption, and please do not make any promises to your host child or say anything that can be perceived as persuading your host child toward adoption. The courts in Latvia have become increasingly upset with host families who maintain a close contact with their host child after hosting. So it is very important to keep any conversations with your host child light in nature and steer clear of any talk about adoption. Also, please be very careful about any information that you give or receive from your host child's caregivers. Oftentimes, the information that they give to you, although given with the best of intentions, is often inaccurate. Only our attorney is able to get accurate information about any particular adoption situation. Please also note that our attorney would be unable to verify every piece of information that may be provided to you by your child's orphanage or foster family, as this takes a lot of time away from her legal responsibilities. Just know that she is on top of your case and will do all that she can to get you to Latvia as quickly as possible. And do keep in mind that according to Hague rules, it would be inappropriate to ask your child's caregiver specific personal questions about your child or about their adoption status. Just please be careful. Although it would be best to not have any contact with anyone in Latvia during the adoption process, we do realize this may not be a realistic thing for host families. Also, keep in mind that anything you post online in any capacity can and will make its way back to Latvia and could affect your ability to adopt, as well as affect the adoptions of families that come after you. This brings us to the topic of Facebook. There is no doubt that there is a wealth of wonderful information being posted and shared on Facebook about Latvian adoption, and the families on there are of great support to each other. But do remember that when you read information posted online, that every adoption case is different from each other, and sometimes cases have to be moved along more quickly than others in Latvia due to a child's medical needs or because they are aging out for adoption. Also, be aware of the importance of not posting personal information about your prospective adopted child on any online forum. Even private groups are not private, and Latvia has found some information posted about their children that has caused them to get quite upset. Until your adoption is finalized in Latvia after your second trip, your child's information is private, so please protect it. This includes not posting pictures or the names of your prospective adoptive child until after your adoption is finalized on trip 2. Also, again, please be careful that any information that you post online is not going to upset Latvia, because they often do find out what you are saying online. Always keep in mind that comments online can be misinterpreted or misunderstood in a foreign language, and online postings have created some issues within the orphanages and the courts once they get wind of them. Thank you all for understanding this. Up on your screens now should be a quick list of facts in regard to adoption from Latvia. Please take just a minute to look through the list of items, and please let me know if there's anything on there that you would like me to expand upon at the end of our talk. I will also be sharing some photos of several of our families who have adopted children from Latvia at the very end of our talk. Just a minute to take a look. That about wraps up the summary of the adoption process from Latvia. I would also like to give you my direct phone number in case you have questions later on. My direct phone number is 770-514-7324. And you can also see there that you can email me at kb@adoption-related-services.org. You can also reach out to Barbara Lorenzo directly at 717-227-9560. If you would like, I would be happy to send you an information packet that we hope will help to answer some more of your questions, as well as financing information and application and references for our agency. Please call or email me and leave your email addresses, and I can get that sent out to you right away. And don't forget to let the agency you hire know if you would like your child to be placed on the ministry list. While we open this talk up to questions now, please enjoy some screens showing photos of a few of our families who have adopted children from Latvia. Would anyone like to ask any specific questions at this time? Does anyone have any questions?
Kelly, this is Amy Buckman. I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, great. It's okay. When you guys are checking the status of whether a child is available for international adoption, is it possible to also check if they have younger siblings that are also available, or would we already know that if they were available?
If they were also available for adoption, the court will share that information with our attorney, so we are always notified. We've never had a family be surprised about siblings later on.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one more question.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry. My other question was, if you bring the child back home with you after the first trip, what is the requirement as far as medical insurance? Does Latvia have a requirement for medical insurance to be provided at that time?
Right. Latvia does not have any requirement, but we do have a very strong suggestion and requirement, if you will, that you obtain some kind of medical coverage for your child. Most group policies nowadays are required under federal law to provide the child with insurance once you come home from the first trip, because you have been considered to be placed with a child for purposes of adoption, and that's the wording that you'll see under federal law. So if you have a group policy, they are required to cover the child when they first come home after the first trip. Also, we have a lot of military families that we work with, and military insurance under TRICARE also will cover the children after the first trip when they first come home. So I would say nowadays, to be perfectly honest, probably 80 to 90% of our families are able to get their child on their regular insurance when they come home from the first trip. If that's not an option for you, you would want to purchase something called travel insurance or catastrophic insurance. It's the same thing. What that is, it has a very high deductible, usually about $5,000 deductible, but heaven forbid something very serious were to happen, it's not going to financially ruin you as a family. So we have had, over the years, we've had some broken bones, we've had a surgery with a hospital stay, we've had stitches, we've had some things that have gotten quite expensive for the adoptive family, and luckily they've all had some sort of insurance in place so that, again, they weren't financially ruined by the illness.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I have a couple of questions here in the chat section online, so I'll read them and I'll answer them, and then if anyone else has any other questions to throw out there, I'd be happy to answer that as well. Somebody asks, what sort of things do families do during the bonding time on the first trip? Sightseeing? Do parents stay in a hotel? Are those extra costs, or is that included? Lodging is something that when I gave the total cost is included in that total cost, but it's not, of course, included in the agency fee. So the adoption of one child being somewhere probably around 35, 37, 38,000, that would also include any lodging expenses that you had to incur, but you will pay your lodging to the lodging location directly. On the first, families do lots of sightseeing. We have some great suggestions on things that you can do during your time in Riga. Spend at least a few days in Riga, if not your entire trip. There's lots of information on each of the regions, both online and in our information packet, on some things that you can do during the first trip. But most families do sightseeing. Your child is with you. So as soon as you go to court, that first full day that you're in Latvia, your child comes back to your hotel room with you and stays with you for the rest of the trip. So they're also able to help you with taking you around to the sites and, of course, translating the language for you and things like that. There are several different options as to where to stay in Latvia. Some of the larger cities, for example, certainly Riga being the capital, you have the option of hotels, bed and breakfast, apartments, things like that. In some of the more remote regions, you may not have a lot of options. You almost always have the option of a bed and breakfast. In some of the outlying areas, that is the one and only option. And again, we have some suggestions for those types of things in our information packet, your travel packet rather, that helps to prepare you for travel. I hope I answered that question fully. If anyone has anything else they'd like to know about that, just let me know.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly. It's Miley Allen. I have a question.
Okay.
With regard to Riga and their orphan court, I know that you mentioned that regardless of whether you host or not, you have to do the full 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have any idea what is the reasoning for that? Whereas other, I mean, is there some particular reason that they do that, or
no?
Just no.
Okay. There's no particular reason. Riga is probably the most difficult region to work with in Latvia. They're also the busiest region, of course, being in the capital city. And they implemented that probably just a couple of years ago. It's mandatory. So 3 weeks if you've hosted the child, 4 weeks if you've not hosted the child. And there hasn't been any since to date.
Okay, so there is a difference. Okay.
All right.
Got it.
And then don't forget, you have to add those 2 extra days for the visitor's visa if they're coming home with you after the first trip.
Right. Got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Another question that was sent in, what if we find that our host child is not available for adoption? Are there other options or things to consider? If you start the adoption process, I hope I'm going to answer this correctly. If not, just let me know. But if you start the adoption process with our agency, of course, you're paying fees for their services. We're working on paperwork. You're getting a home study report done, all of those wonderful things. All of that paperwork and all of those services are transferable to any child. So heaven forbid your host child were not available for adoption. Of course, I know that would be devastating to hear that, but we are still with you to complete an adoption from Latvia. So as long as you don't give up, all of that work that we've all done together is still going to result in the adoption of a child, again, as long as you don't give up. So I hope I'm answering that correctly. In other words, you're hiring us for these services of helping you to adopt a child, not necessarily a particular child, if that makes sense. Does anyone have any other questions now, or should I just answering the questions in the little chat section here?
Kelly, I have a question. This is Lisa Janikowski, and the child that we hosted will be 16 in July. So how does that work as far as, if it takes 10 months to complete the process? How would that? Right. The whole adoption itself does not have to be completed by their 16th birthday. What has to happen before they turn 16 is the I-800A form has to be filed before their 16th birthday. And in order to file that, you have to have a completed home study report. So you will want to get a home study report done and then file that paperwork with immigration. But then there's a second deadline with these 16-year-olds. And the second deadline states that you have 180 days from the approval on your I-800A form in which to file an I-800 form, which I've probably already confused you because it's even hard to see. What that means is you'll get approval on your I-800A form, and then you do have to make a trip to Latvia, go to court, come home, file additional paperwork with immigration, and that has to be done within 180 days of that initial immigration approval. So I would guide you on a few tricks that we've learned through the years of doing this to try to buy you as much time as possible to complete your. But if the child is not turning 16 until July, as long as they are legally available for adoption, you're going to have any trouble completing that in the time frame needed. Again, provided you do your paperwork quickly on your end, and provided the paperwork in Latvia is in order, you won't have any trouble completing that adoption. Okay. And one other question. Our adoption for our daughter was completed in 2012. So is anything that I've submitted, and somewhere when that first process started, I received a letter, we have this documentation someplace that says we were eligible to adopt 2 children. And we only adopted 1, and then, this all came about now with the hosting and everything. So would anything in my home study or the dossier or anything be applicable to another adoption if we were to go through with it, or does everything start completely new?
It pretty much starts completely new. I'll point out a couple of things. If you have any leftover documents that were apostilled for your first adoption, things like your marriage certificates or divorce decrees, if they were applicable, you can still use those extras. Those can be used. In terms of the home study report, each state has different rules in terms of how they would go about updating a report that was done 4 or 5 years ago. So some states may allow their agency to just update the last information, which will save you time, money, and probably some documents. Some states may tell you, nope, you've got to start completely over from the beginning for the home study. So that you'd have to ask your home study agency what your state allows in terms of updating that older report. In terms of immigration, there's nothing that's transferable at this point. You're starting over with immigration, seeking approval again for 1 or 2 children. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll read a question real quick. Someone asked, how would we find an agency to do the home study in Milwaukee? In Wisconsin, we direct all of our families to an agency called Special Children, and the executive director is a woman by the name of Beth Peters, and she has done a lot of home study reports for our families. There's actually a huge pocket of children adopted from Latvia in Wisconsin. So I would direct you to start out with Special Children. If Special Children doesn't service your area of Milwaukee, you can let me know and I can give you some other choices for Milwaukee. If you simply want other choices for Wisconsin as well, I can also email that to you. I can send you a list of the Hague accredited agencies in Wisconsin that you can call if you'd like to make a few calls around. Any other questions thrown out there, or do you want me to keep reading from the chat questions?
Hi, this is Russ Strader. I have a question.
Sure.
So if you're adopting a sibling set at the same time, how does that change in terms of the cost? I mean, I assume you don't have to make like a first trip for each sibling. You can do them both at once.
Oh, yes. You're making all 3 trips at the same time for both of the children. And in terms of the cost, the added costs are going to be minimal. There's $400 additional to the attorney, nothing to the agency. Then you would be looking at, for example, 2 visitors visas, 2 immigrant visas, 2 medical exams at the U.S. Embassy, and the biggest part is going to be the airfare. So I would tell you to estimate for the adoption of the sibling probably an extra maybe 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, with the vast majority of that simply being the airfare for 3 trips.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, somebody asked the question, are children able to attend school when they come home after the first trip? The answer to that is, unfortunately, they are not. Let me explain that a little bit. Your local school systems would be more than happy to accept the children. There's no problem there. However, they are coming home on a visitor's visa, which is the same visa hosting program. The visitor's visa does not allow any child to attend more than 18 hours of classroom study on that visa, 18 hours a week, I'm sorry, classroom study on that visa. And they are not allowed to earn any school credit. So even though your school will take them, the U.S. Embassy touts this as a big no-no and asks that you do not do it. So what some of our families have been able to do is they have been able to contact their local public school system who has allowed their children to audit up to those 18 hours of classroom study a week, which allows your child to get a feel for what school is going to be like here, make some friends, and of course, most importantly, they can begin to start learning the English language. And one of the classes that's key that they sit in on is the ESL class. So although they can't attend school full-time, they can possibly audit classes if the system will allow it. And this goes the same for private school. I mean, they can't be enrolled in any school whatsoever full-time while they are here on a visitor's visa. So that means they can't be enrolled in school until after trip 3 on a full-time basis. Okay, somebody else asked, you mentioned that Riga is the most difficult region to work with. Are there any that you would consider particularly easy, flexible to work with? How is Daugavpils? That is one of the 2 that I was going to mention is extremely easy. Daugavpils is an easy region to work in. Liepāja is an easy region to work in. I would say most of them are pretty easy if they have mentioned before. Rezekne is also an easy region. We see lots of children coming from those regions, and so it's easy because the courts are familiar with the process and they know what to expect. Where you find a little bit of difficulty outside of Riga is when we have regions that have had relatively little, if any, adoptions. And those courts aren't necessarily difficult. It's more that they're not really exactly sure what they're supposed to be doing. So sometimes those regions can be a little bit more challenging and take a little bit longer simply because they haven't seen many adoptions come through their court. What is the time between the first and second trips again? The typical time between the first and second trip is usually about 2.5 to 3 months. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer, and the reason for that is because you can't make the second trip to Latvia until you have approval on the I-800 form. I'm sorry. The I-800 form was the one that you were going to file with immigration after you come home from trip 1. So the sooner you can file that form, the sooner you're going to make that second trip to Latvia. So usually, like I said, typical average is about 2.5 to 3 months between the first and second trip. Are there any exceptions to parents making the first visit? Unfortunately, there are not any exceptions. You both must be there and present before the judge at the beginning and then again at the end of the trip. Sorry to report that. Sorry about that. Okay, does anybody else have any questions that I can answer for you now?
Kelly, I have one more. Is
Sure.
there any difference if the child is in a foster home or if they're in an orphanage? Is there anything different with the procedure?
No, not at all. The process to adopt is exactly the same.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any other questions?
Can you repeat your phone number or put it back up on the screen again? I didn't get it, sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody is asking if their host child is not yet available for adoption, but the orphanage has reached out to hope that they would be available for adoption. When would you engage the services of an agency? I would say a lot of that would depend upon the time frame that Latvia thinks it may take in order to clear them for adoption. And our attorney may be able to get some further information on that if she were to call to the court. Typically, on average, if the paperwork to allow a child to be adopted has not been started at all, from the time they start that paperwork in Latvia until the child is actually cleared for adoption is usually a good 6 months. And of course, sometimes it can be a little bit longer depending upon whether or not the birth parents try to challenge any court rulings. So if the court rules against the birth parents, they do have the opportunity to appeal that decision, and any appeals that they make, of course, are going to prolong that process a little bit. So I don't know at what stage the children you're asking about may be in terms of freeing them for adoption. If it's not been started at all yet, I would say it's probably a little bit early to start the paperwork process. You know, because a home study report can take a couple of months, you're not terribly early. But I would want to find out more information from the court as to the time frame they're looking at so that I can give you the best answer. Because your approval does have an expiration of 15 months. And in order to renew that, you're going to have to pay for another home study. So I'd want to try to time it so that that 15 months is going to buy you enough time to finish up the process. And that might be something that we could talk about by phone a little bit more too. Somebody else has asked, can your agency help push along the opening for adoption process? Unfortunately, no agency has the ability to try to push along the courts to get the adoption process moving along. So as much as we'd like to be able to help you with that, we don't have the authority to do so. Our attorney in Latvia also does not have the actual authority to do so, but because she is very well respected, we have found in some cases that if she has a relationship with the court in particular, she has been able to speak with the court to notify them that there is a family who would like to adopt the child, and then the court has taken action to get the paperwork in order. So we have seen that happen, but none of us have the authority to make it happen. It's just a suggestion or information that she can give to the court and hopefully lights a little fire under their fannies to get that paperwork started. So we have seen it be helpful. Okay, what about the risk of a family member stalling or court not cater to that? That's a really great question, actually. Let's see, I've been working in Latvia for almost 9 years now. April will be about 9 years. And I can honestly tell you, in all of those years, I've only seen a family member, I'm thinking, there was one in this past year. I'm only remembering that one, so maybe there was 2 over all those 9 years where the birth family tried to stop the adoption process. So I would say the risk is extremely minimal, because if the family wanted the child to not be adopted, typically they would bring the child out of the orphanage, and then it's a moot point. And the orphan courts will always give priority to the birth family, but if they're not found to be suitable, then they will often be ignored. Okay, does anybody else have any questions that I can answer for you at this time? Anything?
I do have a quick question.
Sure.
This was not recorded, was it? Because I missed the time zone, and I'm in Central Time, so I came in late.
Yes, I actually did record it. The trick will be to see if I could figure out how to email it to you, because I am a little bit technically challenged, but it has been recorded, and I'm quite positive I can figure it out. So if you, can you see my email address on the screen?
Yep, I've got it written down. So you want me to, I'll just email you, and then my name's Jeff Andrews. So.
Okay. That's wonderful, okay. Jeff, and I will send that back to you as soon as my husband tells me how to do it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Somebody is asking about their host child having visitation with their biological parent. Does that mean that the child is not available for adoption? Actually, that doesn't mean anything at all. One of the strange things that we've seen with Latvia, and Latvia is a fantastic country to work with for adoption, but there's a couple of things that we've never quite understood, and one of them is that even though a birth parent's rights may have been severed and the child was taken from the birth family, Latvia still allows them to have a relationship with each other. So it's not at all uncommon to hear about a host child who still sees a biological parent, or goes to visit grandma on the weekends, or goes to dinner with their cousin every Wednesday night. This is actually pretty typical. So I don't see that as any indicator whatsoever as to whether or not the child is available for adoption. Anybody else have any questions for us? Does anyone want me to show the pictures again? One last call. Any other questions? Oh, here's a question. When we get a referral, will we get a picture or video as well? If you have not hosted, that's when they'll send a picture, because of course if you've hosted, you probably have a photo album. But if you've not hosted, they will send us one picture of your referral child at the time of the referral. We will not get a video. They've never done videos. Any other questions from anybody? Okay, well, if you don't have any other questions at this time, we want to thank you again for joining us. We so appreciate you being up late on the Eastern Seaboard to talk to us. If you'd like to, you can always call me directly. You see my phone numbers on the screen. You can call Barbara at the main number, or you can email us. We'd be very, very happy to answer all of your questions, and we'll take as much time as you need to make sure that you understand and feel comfortable with the process. Thank you so much again. I hope to talk to each and every one of you at some point. I will figure out how to send this recording to anybody who requests it, and I will again wish everybody a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much. Good night. Thank you. Good night.